welcome back. This time, as I promised, we are going to talk about arrows. I'm gonna tell you the parts of the arrows and how they work and how you tune your arrow. It seems that too many archers doesn't care about their arrows. They just buy some kind of arrows, even mix them, and that's wrong. The most important thing is to have a perfect arrow flight, and how you do that, you have to know your own draw weight and draw length and your style of shooting. Of course, first you need to trust for those archery shops who sells those arrows. You can buy good arrows for beginning, but then after you learn how to shoot with good technique and pure release and clean release, then it's time to check your arrow and make sure it flies straight. Otherwise you cannot learn how to shoot accurately. But before that, you also need to understand what are the parts of the arrows and how do they work. So let's start. This is my old arrow. As you see, it's lots of used, but never mind that. First, there is a point of the arrow or the head of the arrow, and this arrow point is the thing we want to hit to the target. There are many shaped arrow points, and depending what you are going to shoot, are you going to hunt? Are you going to hunt big game or small game? Are you going to fish, or are you going to go and compete in indoor or outdoor range? There are many different kind of points, but the common thing is the mass, how much the arrow point weighs, and that is what it matters. So typical point weighs about 100 or 125 grains. So that's important thing. We talk about that later. Then if the point is attached to the arrow by screwing it, then there need to be little insert inside the shaft tube. So you glue little insert in, and then you can put your point on. Sometimes you just glue the whole point, so without the insert, and especially if you have wooden arrows, then you use certain tool to make it sharp like a pencil. Then you just glue the point on to the arrow. So you glue it or you screw it. And then there's a shaft. Most common shaft nowadays is carbon shafts. So like this, my arrow, this is carbon, even if it looks like wood. Then there are aluminium shafts, and then wooden shafts, different type of wood, and then even glass for fishing. If the shaft is wood, it is typically cedar or pine or birch. Of course, bamboo too. Okay, and then there's a fletching. Always use natural fletching, not veins or plastic or rubber veins. That is not as good as real turkey feathers. There are different shapes and different length of the fletching. Typically it is from 3 inches up to 5 or 6 inches, but it can be smaller too, and then bigger ones. For example, This is a flu arrow I made. So you can see there are the big feathers and then shorter feathers, and there are 4 of them. This is meant to shoot to aerial targets, and why there's this big fletching is to make it like a parachute to break down the speed of the arrow. So I want it to drop down quite fast and safely. That's why the big fletching. So as you see, it depends about the purpose of the arrow, what kind of fletching do you use, and of course how heavy the arrow is. You probably need a little bit bigger fletching. Most typically we use 3 feathers on the fletching, and it's 4 or 5 inch long. Different shapes, that is matter of the taste. At the end of the arrow there is a nock, and there are different kind of nocks available. If the shaft is just a tube like it is in aluminium and carbon shafts, you just press the nock in, so it's easy to change if you break it. But if you need a bigger one like I need with my clumsy fingers, and I want to shoot as fast as I can, then I want to use a little bit bigger and wider nocks, and I also twist them open to make it easier to reload my arrows. We need to hit to the target with this point, whatever we use. And the purpose of the shaft is to carry on this head to the target. The purpose of the fletching is to keep the arrow straight during the flight and maintain the course, maintain the direction of the arrow, and keep it straight and calm during the flight. So the purpose of the fletching is actually not to fix the bad release or bad start of the flight, even if it does do that, of course, because the more it makes this kind of movements, the more it loses its energy and speed, and also it loses its accuracy. And the purpose of the nock is to keep the arrow on the string when we release, and then let go when it's time to let go. Now, the most important thing in arrow is to understand the spine of the shaft, and it is usually written down on the shaft, and there are those hundreds of numbers. So like this is 400 spined arrow. The smaller the number is, the stiffer and harder the arrow is. The bigger the number, the more flexible arrow you have. It is because they measure the flexibility with my language. They put the arrow on certain stand, and then they put some weight in the middle of the arrow. It is about 2 pounds. It's actually 1.94 pounds of weight, what they put on the middle of the shaft, and then they measure how much the shaft is bending. And then if it bends like half of inch, 0.5 inch, then they calculate 1,000 times of that. I'm sorry, my English it's bad, but first you measure in inches how much it is bent, and then you put 1,000 times that number. So this arrow, as it is 400, it has bent 0.4 inches, and then 1000 times that, it is 400. 400 thousandths of parts of the inch, how do you say it? But only thing you need to know, the bigger the number is, the more it will bend. Now, the archer's paradox means that, as you see, so when we release, the string is hitting straight forward to the center line of the bow limb, like this. But because we don't have a hole here where to put the arrow go through, then the arrow is resting on the side of the bow riser. Like this, it is sideways. The point is a little bit left. Same thing if you shoot with thumbs and you keep the arrow on the right side, the arrow is pointing to the right. How we can put the arrow point fly straight in the same direction that the string is pushing the arrow? How we do that? It is by making sure that the arrow needs to bend enough to go around the bow riser. Depending how thick this part is, the more or less the arrow needs to go around the bow and then continue the flight straight, directly the same direction as the string pushes it. And that is why we need to tune our arrows. If my arrow is very stiff, it doesn't bend at all, then when we release, the arrow goes forward, and then at this point it separates from the string, and because it's sideways like this, the end of the arrow will hit to the bow, and then the end will turn like this. The arrow will go fishtail movement. If the arrow is bending too much, again, when we release, it goes around too much, and that is also the same thing, that arrow goes sideways and starts flying like a fish. If the arrow is just slightly too stiff, then this happens. It goes forward, it tries to bend, but actually it is jumping from the bow and it turns opposite way, like this, and then starts this fishtail movement. So we need to fix our arrows so that they are just bending enough to go around the bow and without hitting to the handle section or riser, and then start flying straight where the string is hitting. How do we make sure the arrow is flexible enough? The arrow makers, the manufacturers of arrow, they have their own scales where you can find out which spine would be perfect for your own bow type and your own draw, your own. So remember, if you have 40-pound bow and you pull a little bit shorter, then it is also a little bit less pounds. So you need to know how much pounds is your own draw, and then you can find out those informations from the arrow manufacturers. For example, I know this 400 gold tip traditional arrow is meant to be shot with 55 to 75 pound bows. So there is about 20 pounds scale where this same arrow is okay. Then if it's 500, it is a little bit less, so the scale is then from 35 to 55 pounds of bow. Sometimes the manufacturers are telling the spine in poundage. So at the old days also this gold tip traditional was reported to be 400 spines as 5575 and 500s were 3555. So it was the scale between the lower poundage and the highest poundage. So now if you have 40-pound bow, you can buy those 500 spine arrows, because you can find that it is meant to be from 35 to 55 pounds of bows. But it doesn't mean that it is still perfect for you, because if I had 35-pound bow, 40-pound bow and 50-pound bow, the same arrow will not fly perfectly with all my bows. So the arrow need to be tuned with each bow. And how do you do the tuning? First of all, the heavier the point is, it makes the shaft more flexible. The lighter the point, the stiffer it acts when released. Then the longer shaft, the more flexible shaft it is, and the shorter the shaft is, that stiffer it gets. So those are those things how you can tune your arrows to make it bend perfectly and go perfectly around your bow. Just like this, and then this and this and this. So how I do it: when I have a new bow or new arrows, I take couple of them and I put my points and inserts, and I put my nocks and tunings, whatever I use here, but I don't put these fletchings on, and I will shoot that arrow without the fletching, because then fletching is not affecting to the flight, and I can see right after when I start shooting that which way the arrow is turning. I shoot about from 10 meters of distance, and I use good foam target, so when the arrow hits to the target, it stays on that position. So because I keep my arrow on the right side, and if I see that arrow is turning like this, I need to think, okay, this is way too stiff or way too flexible arrow. As I know the scales from the arrows manufacturer, I can decide is it too flexible or too stiff. And then if it is too stiff, then only option is to change the points for heavier points. Usually I use 125 grain arrowheads, but I can put 145 or even 200 grain points. I can also use those weight inserts. There are special inserts which weight a lot, so I just make sure that I will put more weight to the point, and that makes the arrow more flexible. If it's not enough, then I need to buy weaker shafts. Okay, then if I find that the arrow is too weak, it is bending too much and turning around, then it's a little bit easier. Of course I can use a little bit lighter points to make the arrow stiffer, but then I also can start cutting the shaft a little bit shorter and shorter, just small piece at a time, and then shoot until I found that the arrow is flying straight, and after that I just put my feathers on and then it's ready. Then I can order and buy rest of my arrows correctly cut it, and those with those fletchings, if I don't want to make my own arrows, but I usually do. If you cut wood, it is easier to make some kind of saw and cut it down, of course. If it's aluminium shaft, you can find those cheap tools which are made for cutting pipes and tubes. So those are cheap devices. But if you cut the carbon shafts, make sure that you don't use any saw, because if you saw, then it could make some little breakings here in the shaft, and it can be that when you shoot there comes little nasty sticks in your hand, or even make it break when you shoot. So how you cut it, you need to use a drill and those cutting edges for drill. I don't know the word in English now, but I will write it down what I mean. So just, or then you can buy a certain machine which is made for cutting these carbon shafts. Okay, now we have tuned our shafts and arrows without the fletching. Then we put the fletching on. You would like to put a little bit twist on the arrow flight, and so you can use the helical fletching to the right or to the left. Just don't mix them. You can use glue or tape to put the feathers on. You can use different kind of machines to gluing faster and easier, and exactly in certain angle. They are not too expensive devices. You just put the arrow on to the stand, and then you have certain clips which help you to put the feathers on. Usually you can use 3, some are using 2 feathers, some 4 or even 6. Back in old days they thought that you need to have a cock feather and the hen feathers, so 2 similar and 1 different colors. And why there was a cock feather is because people were thinking that you need to put the cock feather opposite way from the bow, so that when you release the arrow, the fletching doesn't touch to the bow. So if the cock feather is inside, it could easily touch to the bow and then turn the arrow off. But nowadays it's proved and tested with high-speed cameras that if you make your arrows very correctly spined, the fletching doesn't touch at all to the bow because of this paradox movement. So first, when you release, it bends to the one direction depending which side you are keeping the arrow. It turns one direction, and then there's the opposite twist right after. And it is so that when the arrow is first going around the bow, the opposite movement will turn the fletching off from the bow, so it doesn't touch at all, even if your cock feather is inside. And if you keep the cock feather inside, it is so that then even those hen feathers doesn't touch to the shelf or your bow hand. But in horseback archery, we don't care which way we put the arrow on, it is just rapid fire. And as I told you, if the arrow is correctly spined, then it makes its twists and the fletching does not touch the bow at all. About this paradox movement and tuning, you see, if I show my fingers, when the arrow is released and it bends in one direction first, then there is this opposite bending in other direction right after. So it goes like a snake. If we put these bending situations like this on top of each other, we can find two knots. So here it's one, and at the end of the arrow it's the other knot. And this is where the bending happens around those two knots. And when we tune our arrow flight straight, we want that these two knots are flying straight to the target. Even the arrow is bending one side and other side, we want that these two crossings are flying straight to the target. If they do, then your arrow is fine. If the spine is not correctly and the archer's paradox makes the arrow go sideways, then these knots is flying sideways too, and then the arrow will not fly straight and you will not hit the target. Okay. Then very important thing is the FOC, front of center, and that means that how much front your arrow's mass center point is from the exact center of the arrow. The FOC is the percentage of that difference. There are calculators in internet, you can find them easily. You just measure the length from nock groove to the shaft itself. No insert, no point, just where the shaft starts to the nocking groove. You put this measurement on, and then you take some kind of sharp plate, knife or anything, and you measure where is the mass center of the arrow. And when you find it, then you measure again from the nock groove to the mass center, and you put that also to the calculator, and then it will calculate how much is your FOC. It is recommended from traditional shooters to have 10 to 15% of that FOC. Some competition shooters use under 10% of FOC, but it is okay if it's just on front of the actual center of the arrow. The more front it is, that makes the arrowhead go straight in flight, even if there is some different wind or any conditions, and the lighter end of the arrow is just guiding the point. But if the FOC is moving to the center or even backside of the actual center, then it makes the arrow like a kind of a little aeroplane. If the mass is back, these feathers are more like wings and they are guiding the arrow go whatever it likes. But if the mass is on front, so this is heavier and this is light, then the fletching is just helping the arrow go straight as it should be. If the mass is in the middle, then the arrow can fly also fine, but it is then not too easy to feathers to make the arrow flight steady. So you see, it can make this movement quite long time, and if we put the mass more to the front, it makes these feathers easier to calm the flight down and straighten the arrow. If it's here in the middle side, it will wobble much longer and it is harder for the feathers to make it calm flight. That's why make sure that your mass center point is on front of the actual middle part of the arrow. I have never calculated before yesterday, and my FOC was 12.9, so it's in the range of what they recommend. But I don't care it. Everything what I care about is that I check it that there is more weight on front than the back, and then I test my arrows without feathers first and see that they are flying perfectly straight and hitting to the target, and then I just put my 3 feathers on, and then I want to make a little bit helical flight. So either I put those feathers straight but a little bit in angle, or I use helical fletching, so I just glue them a little bit like a spiral, so it will start rolling. It is same when you shoot guns, so we want the bullet go around. That movement makes the feathers easier to calm down this twisting, and it also makes the arrow go calmly and kind of drill through the air more precise. But if you don't want to make arrow turn, it is okay to put them fly just straight, but it would help if the arrow would go a little bit like that. I'm sorry, my English, it is really difficult for my language to tell you. I hope that you find this somehow useful. There are plenty of good videos available, for example in YouTube in English, how to tune your arrows, how to correct the archer's paradox and so on. So go and find out, maybe you can get clearer message. One more time at the end, fastly. The point, insert or not, maybe you can glue it. Then there's a shaft. There are wooden shafts like cedar, pine, birch and bamboo shafts typically. Then there are aluminium shafts, and then there are carbon shafts. Carbon are most expensive, but they are strongest material. The aluminium is okay and quality is great until you miss your target and hit a little bit sideways or to the rock or something hard. And if the aluminium shaft is bent once, you cannot make it straight anymore, so it's garbage. But it's quite cheap and it's very good quality. The wood is most beautiful, of course, more authentic and more original, and those are typically cheapest material. But the bad thing of wood is that it is not even, so the weight inside the shaft is different in different parts. There are those growth lines which are making it more unsteady sometimes. So you need to put a lot of attention and care to pick up those good shafts if you start using wooden arrows. And then of course they break more easily than these other materials. I use carbon because it's hardest, it's most durable, and no matter if it's winter or rainy day or hot, it is always the same. It is acting always the same, and that is what I want. I want to tune my arrows to act similar when I shoot. So that was the shaft. Then the spine. Spine is how much it is bending. The bigger the number is, the more it will bend. And then there's fletching and knock. Also remember that if you tune your end of the arrow, like I have done, I have tape here, it puts a little bit more mass on the back. So make sure that if you put some tunings here, make sure that the FOC doesn't turn too back. So put more weight here, make sure it is okay. I have found out that 125 grains are enough for me and for my tunings, but I also let my arrows longer, so I don't want to cut them as short as possible. I let them be longer. I don't care if they are longer. All what I care is that they fly straight. And how you can tune the arrow fly straight? It is changing the mass of the head. So the heavier the point is, the more flexible the shaft is, and then the lighter the point is, then stiffer the shaft is. Also you can make the shaft stiffer if you cut them shorter, if your draw length allows to cut. That is how you tune your archer's paradox correctly. And remember, when the string is pushing the arrow, it will bend first on one direction, and we want that the arrow goes around the bow and then it continues to fly exactly the same direction that the string pushes. If it is too weak, the arrow goes too much around and goes sideways. If it is a little bit too stiff, it jumps from the bow and turns this way. If it is way too stiff, it doesn't bend like at all, then the end of the arrow will hit to the bow and then it jumps this way. So it is acting similar than very weak arrow. So you just need to know what spined arrows you are tuning and figure out what is the matter if the arrow doesn't go straight. You can also hear this click, the nasty sound when you shoot, and that is because the arrow is way too stiff or way too weak, and it is also hitting. When you have a good flight, the string is bending the arrow first to go around, then there's the opposite movement when the fletching is also passing the bow without touching, and then the snake movement goes. And when there is this snake movement, there's one direction, another direction, remember this, one direction, another direction, and there are these two knots. You want that those two knots are flying straight to the target. That is when the arrow flies straight without the fletching. If you want to tune your arrows with the fletching, then you can make the paper test. So you go and shoot through the paper like 1 or 2 meters away from the paper and shoot through, and then you see what kind of hole there will be on the paper. You want to find the star, the Mercedes-Benz star, like this. It goes straight then. But if it's like a drop of water, there are a hole here and then the star next to the hole, then it is flying one direction or another. You can figure out from that hole where it goes. Hot glue is good option when you tune your arrows, because you can put the hot glue and put your point on, shoot, and then you can a little bit melt it and put it off and then cut the arrow if you are cutting it. If you don't have too much of tuning here, one good option is just you can put your arrow point on and glue it permanently, and then you just cut it from the end of the arrow. But always make sure that the cutting is straight, because if it's a little bit not straight, then the nock is not straight either, and then the arrow will not fly straight. So make always sure that the cutting is straight. So you can cut the end of the shaft and then just press the basic nock on and shoot and shoot and shoot, and then check the arrow flight. So I hope you find some use from this video. I'm sorry the difficult way to explain things, but my language is what it is. Yeah, now when we understand how the bow works and how the arrows are working, then next we can start shooting, thinking the clean release and so on. So thank you for watching and stay tuned. See you next time. Bye.